The constitution of the late Roman Empire was an unwritten set of guidelines and principles passed down mainly through precedent. The constitution of the Roman Principate, which was established by the Emperor Augustus in the 1st century BC, had governed the Roman Empire for 3 centuries. Diocletian became emperor in 284, and his reign marked the end of the Principate and the beginning of the Dominate. The constitution of the Dominate ultimately recognized monarchy as the true source of power, and thus ended the fiction of shared power between the Roman Emperor and the Roman Senate. After Diocletian had reorganized the superstructure of the constitution, he then reorganized the administrative apparatus of the government. When Diocletian abdicated the throne in 305, the empire quickly descended back into chaos. After the chaos had subsided, however, much of Diocletian's constitution remained in effect. His division of the empire into west and east, with each half under the command of a separate emperor, remained with brief interruptions of political unity. The capital of the Western Empire was never returned to Rome. The Senate and executive magistrates continued to function as Diocletian's constitution had originally specified. In Diocletian's civil and military divisions of the empire remained in effect. Later emperors, especially Constantine the Great, and Justinian modified Diocletian's constitution. Augusta and Caesares. Under Diocletian's new constitution, power was shared between 2 emperors called Augusta. The establishment of 2 co-equal Augusta marked a rebirth of the old republican principle of collegiality, as all laws, decrees, and appointments that came from one of the Augusta were to be recognized as coming from both conjointly. One Augustus was to rule the western half of the empire, and the other Augustus was to rule the eastern half of the empire. Diocletian made Maximian his co-Augustus, and gave him the Western Empire, while Diocletian took the Eastern Empire. Diocletian made Nicomedia his capital, and Maximian made Milan his capital. To make the 2 halves symbolically appear to be one, Diocletian called his territory Patres Orientis, while Maximian called his territory Patres Occidentis. The Augusta were legally distinct from the old princeps, because under the Principate, the princeps took the place of the old republican magistrates. When a princeps issued a decree, that decree was only valid so long as that princeps was emperor, whereas in contrast, under the Republic, any decree issued by a magistrate was only good so long as that magistrate was in office. Under the Republic and the Principate, only the Senate and legislative assemblies were continuous institutions, and thus only they could pass laws that remained in effect indefinitely. Under Diocletian's new Dominate, the Augusta took the place of the Senate and the assemblies, and thus any decree of an Augustus remained in force even after that particular emperor left office. Such an act could only be invalidated by a future emperor. The logical extension of this concept meant that neither a magistrate, the assemblies, nor the Senate could legally restrain the emperor. The old republican magistrates, as well as the princeps, both had legal status. Under the Republic, the state gave the magistrates the authorization to hold their office, while under the Principate, the state gave the princeps the legal authorization to be emperor. Any Augusta, in contrast, did not need authorization from the state to be emperor, because the Augusta became the state. The higher authority of the Augusta was illustrated by their robes and the imperial diadem, as well as the elaborate ceremony required of anyone who approached them. Unlike the old princeps, the Augusta were viewed as being more than mortal, which was illustrated by the honors that they received. These honors had, in the past, been reserved only for the gods. While emperors had received such honors in the past, they only received these honors after their death, and yet, the Augusta could receive such honors while they were still alive. In 293, Diocletian and Maximian appointed 2 Caesares, which resulted in an arrangement known as the Tetrarchy. The Caesares were subordinate to their Augusta, and the only authority that they had was that which had been given to them by their Augusta. Their status was so inferior to the Augusta that they received a fixed salary. The powers that were delegated to them usually included the right to hear appeals, and a set of provinces were often assigned to them so that they could supervise the governors of those provinces. The reason why Diocletian created the office of Caesar was to create a method by which orderly successions could occur, so that when one Augustus died, one of the two Caesares replaced that Augustus. When a new Caesar was appointed, his Augustus adopted him. Diocletian had hoped that the Augusta would jointly resign at a given point in time, and allow their Caesares to replace them. Administration of the empire. Diocletian separated the civil administrative apparatus and the military administrative apparatus in order to mitigate the risk that future generals might attempt to seize the throne through force. And then he reorganized both of them, while changes were made by subsequent emperors. The basic structure established by Diocletian would govern the empire until its eventual fall in the west during the 5th century. The government of the empire was divided between central and provincial levels. The central government general refers to those civil officials directly associated with the emperor's court and the highest-ranking military offices. The provincial government includes all levels of provincial governors and local military commanders. The Imperial Court, the central government of the Roman Empire, consisted of the Imperial Court. At the top of the central government was the emperor himself. From his presence all imperial authority flowed, both civil and military. The edicts of the emperor were binding upon all persons throughout the empire. To support the emperor in the administration of the empire, the emperor was attended by numerous court officials. Chief among these court officials was the Imperial Chancellor, created by Constantine the Great in 320 AD. The Chancellor functioned as the head of government for the empire. Ranked as a count of the empire, the Chancellor oversaw the entire civil service. The Chancellor's portfolio included a significant number of functions handled by modern government officials. The Chancellor was responsible for conducting court ceremonies and regulated audiences with the emperor. All correspondences with foreign powers were sent by and embassies of foreign powers to the emperor were received by the Chancellor. The Chancellor commanded the Imperial Intelligence Service, who handled communications between the emperor and provincial governments, as well as gathering intelligence as the emperor's secret police force. The chancellors also oversaw the Imperial Transportation Service, a series of forts and stations spread along the major road systems connecting the regions of the Roman world. These forts and stations served as relay points and provided horses to dispatch riders and vehicles for court officials, as well as dining in resting quarters. The Imperial Guard Corps was under the Chancellor's command, as well as the various imperial arsenals located throughout the empire. The Chancellor had direct control over the Imperial Chancellery, the central administrative organ of the empire which coordinated the civilian functions of the empire and provided direct support to the emperor. The Imperial Chancellery was divided into 4 bureaus: the Clerical Bureau, the Correspondence Bureau, the Legal Bureau, and the Arrangement Bureau. Each of these bureaus supported a bureau director who reported to the Chancellor. The Clerical Bureau drafted official documents for the emperor's approval, such as imperial decrees and appointments, and served as the central imperial archive. The Correspondence Bureau received and responded to correspondence from public officials to the emperor, managed representation with foreign powers, and served as the Imperial Translation Service. The Legal Bureau handled the various legal petitions the emperor received, such as appeals from lower courts. The Arrangement Bureau oversaw the administrative matters the emperor faced while traveling, selected from those with significant legal training. The judge served as the emperor's chief legal advisor and was responsible for overseeing the enactment of legislation and for drafting imperial decrees. Beginning in early 5th century, he presided over the empire's supreme tribunal, which heard appeals from the various lower courts of the empire. One of the highest-ranking court official was the Imperial Chamberlain. The Chamberlain, usually a eunuch, managed the daily operations of the imperial palace. He oversaw the palace servants, also eunuchs, and was responsible for the imperial bedchamber, wardrobe and receptions. While the Chamberlain technically possessed no administrative authority outside of managing the imperial household, his daily and intimate contact with the emperor granted him great influence over other court officials, allowing him de facto coordinating authority over all court officials. In the case of weak emperors, the Chamberlain's influence made him the most powerful man in the empire. However, should the emperor be a powerful force, the Chamberlain's role in the administration of the empire was minimal. The administration of finances was a chief duty of the Imperial Court. Two officials within the court were concerned with financial affairs. The Count of the Imperial Treasury was the empire's chief financial officer, serving in a role akin to a modern Minister of Finance. The Count oversaw the collection and distribution of imperial taxes, managing the imperial treasury, and controlled imperial mints, state-run mills and textile factories, and state-run mining facilities. The Count also exercised judicial functions as they related to taxation matters, with no appeal of his decision. The other key financial officer was the Count of the Imperial Estates, who administered the private property of the emperor and managed all imperial estates, including the collection of rent derived therefrom. Provincial government. When Diocletian reformed the administrative machinery of the empire, he stripped the civilian administrators of their military powers. Additionally, he further divided the various provinces into smaller units, effectively doubled the number of provinces from 50 to over 100. To this new organization, he imposed two new bureaucratic levels between the emperors and the provinces: the prefectures and the dioceses. Diocletian grouped these 100 provinces into 12 dioceses, which were then grouped into 4 prefectures. The result was that the units of government were much smaller, and thus more manageable, than they had been before Diocletian's reforms. This not only made administration of the empire easier but also helped to minimize the risk of revolt. The 4 prefectures, each led by a civilian praetorian prefect, served as the highest level of provincial government. The prefects were the emperor's top administrators, ranking just below the emperor himself in dignity. While initially serving as the emperor's second-in-command in all matters of imperial administration, the prefects gradually had portions of their authority stripped from them and given to other officers: the masters of the soldiers for military affairs and the Imperial Chancellor for central civilian administration. These reforms were the result of both the lack of officials suitable for the prefects' wide-ranging tasks, and of the desire to reduce the potential challenge to the emperor's authority posed by a power prefect. The civilian powers of the prefects were still vast, however, as they could nominate individuals to fill a gubernatorial vacancy, supervise the conduct of the governors, or even dismiss a governor. Prefects could also interpret the law, hear appeals, control finances, and some were even assigned military responsibilities. The powers of the prefects were so extensive that Diocletian only allowed each prefect to remain in office for a short period of time. The 4 prefectures were called Orientis, Illyrici, Italiae, and Galliarum, with Constantinople, Sirmium, Milan, and Trebes constituting the capitals of the respective prefectures. The cities of Rome and Constantinople both were exempt from the control of a praetorian prefect and instead were controlled by their own civilian governors answering directly to the emperor. These 2 prefects of the city were responsible for the civilian administration of their respective city, presided over their respective senate, and served as the chief judge for civil and criminal cases within the city. The prefects commanded the urban cohorts and the city watchmen in order to maintain order and security within the city. The prefect also oversaw maintenance of the city's aqueducts and supervised the markets. One of his most important duties was to oversee his respective city's corn supply. Ranking between the prefectures and the provinces were the dioceses. Each diocese was led by a civilian governor known as a vicar. Each vicar was appointed by the emperor upon the recommendation of the respective prefect, and held the rank of count second class. Ranking directly below the vicar were the provincial governors, who were appointed by the emperor and held various titles. All provincial governors were counts third class. The highest-ranking provincial governors were the proconsuls, who governed the provinces of Africa, Asia, and Achaea. These three provincial governors reported directly to the emperor due to their strategic value. All other provinces were governed by presidents. The primary duties of the provincial governors were administrative and judicial. The governor could issue decrees that, if approved by the emperor, would become binding upon the province. The governor was also the highest judicial official of the province, with appeals heard by the respective vicar. Counts, civilian and military administrators of the late empire were generally ranked as counts. The rank of count began as title given to the emperor's trusted officials as a mark of imperial confidence, and later developing into a formal rank. Count was not a hereditary title as was found in feudalism, but rather a rank associated within a distinct position within the imperial administration. All counts were automatically members of the senatorial order. As the imperial system expanded, however, new offices were needed, which resulted in the development of three classes within the rank of count: the illustrious, the illustrious men, counts first class; the spectabilis, the admirable men, counts second class; the clarissimus, the most notable men, counts third class. The most important imperial court positions, the highest-ranking military commanders, and the imperial chamberlain were all counts first class. Counts second class were the various proconsuls, vicars of the dioceses, provincial military commanders, and others. Counts third class was the basic qualification to obtain entrance into the Senate and including the governorship of a province and other lower offices. Military structure. To a reformed civilian structure, Diocletian added a reorganized supreme military command. Two significant parts of the reform are apparent: the separation of military commanders from civil administration and the division of the army into two classes: the field armies and the frontier troops. The field armies served as the empire's strategic reserve to respond to crisis where it may arise, whereas the frontier troops were permanently stationed along the empire's borders. Recruited from the ranks of the field armies were the palace troops units, who accompanied the emperor as he traveled around the empire, as were the successor of the Principate Praetorian Guard. The supreme military commanders of the late empire was the master of the soldiers. There were 7 such masters throughout the empire. The establishment of solely military officials provided for a more professional military leadership. The masters were all counts first class. Within the east, there were masters of the soldiers in Illyria, Thrace, and the east. Each of these 3 masters exercised independent command over one of the 3 field armies of the Eastern Empire. There were also 2 masters of the soldiers in the presence who accompanied the Eastern Emperor and who each commanded half of the palace troops. Each of the 5 masters were equally ranked among themselves. Within the West, there was a master of both services and a master of the horse. The master of both services was the supreme military commander of the West, ranking only below the emperor and above all other military commanders, and commander of half the palace troops. The master of the horse held command over half the palace troops and the field army of Gaul, but still under the command of the master of both services. To support the masters of the soldiers, the empire established several military counts. There were 6 such military counts throughout the empire. The military counts were all counts second class. Within the east, there was only one military count, the military count of Egypt. Unlike the military counts of the West, this count commanded the frontier troops stationed in Egypt and reported directly to the Eastern Emperor. Within the West, there were 6 such military counts, one for each of the 5 field armies in Illyria, Africa, Tingitania, Hispania, and Britannia. The 6th military count, the Count of the Saxon Shore, commanded frontier troops along both sides of the English Channel and reported to the Count of Britannia. The 5 regular military counts reported to the master of both services. The various frontier troops were under the command of dukes. These commanders were the spiritual successor of the imperial legates of the Principate. Most dukes were given command of forces in a single province, but a few controlled more than one province.